Greetings, everyone. Prepare yourselves for fresh narratives coming your way on this channel. Before we embark on this journey, we invite you to share in the comments your location. What city or state are you tuning in from? I appreciate your support. Now let us embark on this journey. Julia Bennett disembarked from the plane, her chin held high, radiating an air of confidence. She harbored no shame regarding her 6-week affair in Colombia. What reason does she have to do so? She found herself thriving, sought after, yet constrained by her existence alongside Thomas. Dr. Marcus had stirred desires she had long kept hidden. Their affair danced on the edge of daring excitement, a thrilling escapade, until Thomas's enraged phone call crashed through the fantasy. His furious outburst regarding her audacious infidelity took her by surprise, yet a part of her couldn't help but respect his newfound resolve. As the weeks unfolded, Marcus's allure began to wane. As soon as he detected the fissures in her marriage, he transformed into a figure of control, cruelty, and derision. What had initially seemed liberating transformed into a source of degradation, yet Julia steadfastly declined to acknowledge any sense of regret. She bore his jibes with a sense of pride, yet the relationship concluded with an icy finality as Marcus switched seats to distance himself from her on the journey back. In the midst of it all, Amanda, a co-worker caught in her own web of deceit, disclosed that Thomas had menaced her with the threat of exposure. Eric, the husband of Amanda, was a man whose reputation was not built on the foundations of forgiveness. As fate would have it, a process server lay in wait, delivering divorce papers to Amanda the moment they touched down on American ground. Julia's heart raced at the thought of divorce papers looming over her. Yet a wave of relief washed over her when no one came near. It validated her convictions. Thomas found himself too feeble to depart. She persuaded herself that he was there, wounded yet unwavering, anticipating her arrival. Following 6 weeks with Marcus, she felt a strong urge to reclaim her power, envisioning Thomas yearning for her return. Her confidence lay in ruins at the Ambassador Hotel. Anticipating Thomas's arrival, she discovered the lobby devoid of any presence. Brushing aside a fleeting concern, she confidently approached the front desk. Then one by one, her credit cards fell victim to decline. A wave of unease washed over me. With a strained smile, she insisted on another try, yet the clerk stood resolute. With a resolute heart, she brushed aside the murmurs that trailed her, convinced that Thomas held the answers she sought. Julia's unease intensified as she dialed Thomas's number, only to be met with the disheartening revelation that it had been disconnected. A flicker of panic danced in her chest as a man in a tailored suit drew near, extending a manila envelope toward her. Thomas wished for you to receive this. Silence on legal matters, no expressions of regret, only the enigmatic remains. With a swift motion, she ripped it open, revealing a neatly typed letter alongside a smaller sealed envelope. As she perused the pages, a wave of disbelief constricted her heart. Thomas still held on to his resentment towards her. He had undergone a profound transformation, now cold and vengeful, a stark contrast to the passive man she had once so easily dismissed. Her pulse raced as she took in every word, yet one phrase resonated above the rest. You seem to have rationalized your actions by arriving at the conclusion that I engaged in a tumultuous affair with Deidre during my time in Iraq. I did not do that. Our solitary lapse in judgment never ventured into the realm of intimacy. He recounted the act of soothing a distressed companion, subsequently drawing a parallel to her meticulously orchestrated connections. She recalled the self-satisfied rationale she had employed each time guilt threatened to surface. She sealed her lips, compelling herself to continue reading. I am aware that you too engaged in an affair during my time in Korea. I heard whispers about your peculiar parking habits at the Red Roof Inn. Though you never confessed, the truth remains clear to both of us. Julia's face flushed with anger. That belongs to a bygone era. What prompts the discussion at this moment? They had endured that moment. She believed she had been subtle, or so she assumed. Indeed, it had been an exhilarating experience with the anesthesiologist who had taken on the night shift. Yes, it had ended the moment Thomas returned. But it shouldn't matter now, she continued. Your letter suggests that we exist in a relationship where one partner acts independently, without the need for mutual consent. I suppose that a reversal of roles is only just. Julia felt her heart quicken. Reversal? Thomas was looming over something monumental. With each passing paragraph, the truth became increasingly evident. He had parted ways with the house, emptied his bank accounts, severed his phone plan, and was on the brink of disappearing into the horizon on a lengthy RV adventure. She immersed herself in the pages, oblivious to the inquisitive stares of those around her. It was then that she unearthed the more profound terror lurking beneath the surface. I have conveyed the details of your extracurricular pursuits to HR at the hospital. A contract awaits their signature, ensuring that they will sever ties with you and your esteemed doctor, Marcus, thereby preventing any legal action on my part for their failure to uphold the morality clause. Monday morning promises to be rather eventful for you. Julia felt her heart leap. Once she had traversed those hospital corridors with a sense of pride, recognized as a proficient, albeit straightforward nurse. The loss of that job, the very essence of her identity, would shatter her, yet it was precisely what Thomas desired. Our children received copies of your photos and videos with Marcus, his letter conveyed. I revealed the truth to them. I am embarking on an extended journey. They implored me to refrain from severing ties with you, yet I insisted that I would reach out as frequently as you reached out to me. Not a single time. His mocking tone echoed in her mind, a stark contrast to the man she had once deemed weak. And so came the final blow. I have no intention of ending our marriage. Should you wish to exit, submit a request for abandonment. I shall not dispute. I have already gathered what I require. The dwelling, the vehicles, our wealth, the admiration of the children. Relish the open relationship you imposed upon me. Ah, and I have bestowed upon you one final token of my regard. A Visa gift card valued at $500. That is the entirety of the plastic remaining in your possession. Thomas. Her hands quivered with a subtle intensity. Anger, shame, and terror coiled within her abdomen. With a swift motion, she thrust the letter back into its envelope, turning her back on the feeble offering. Her pride stood resolute, a barrier against the tears that threatened to spill. With her chin held high and her breath trembling, she uttered a curse upon Thomas's name. He embodied the essence of villainy. He had shattered it all. Julia stood tall, strode purposefully to the front desk, and discreetly tucked the envelope beneath her purse. With a sharp snap of her fingers, she asserted, I require a room. My husband has put me in a difficult situation, yet I am capable of managing the expenses. Currency should the need arise. The clerk paused, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. We do accept cash, ma'am. However, a deposit and a valid ID are necessary. Her stomach knotted with tension. What was the extent of her possession? As she rummaged through her purse, her fingers brushed against a meager sum of just $100. Insufficient, to say the least. With determination etched on her face, she ripped open Thomas's smaller envelope and extracted the $500 gift card. She summoned a smile. Give this a go. If Thomas spoke honestly, it might encompass a night or two. She tapped her foot, a rhythmic echo of her impatience as she waited. The card has been successfully processed. Relieved yet simmering with anger, she settled the bill for just one night. Room 1010, Julia Bennett awaits. May your time here be delightful. The clerk exhibited a courteous demeanor, yet an undercurrent of condescension lingered in the air. Or could it have been paranoia? With a swift motion, she seized the key card, gestured to the bellhop, and marched away with determination. Rage coursed through her veins. At Thomas's, in the face of humiliation, at the alarming speed with which her flawless world was disintegrating. The bellhop trailed her luggage cart behind her, the air thick with an uncomfortable silence. As she pressed the elevator button, her eyes flickered to her phone, a silent hope that Thomas would call, igniting a desire to unleash her fury, to demand answers, or at the very least, to verbally dismantle him piece by piece. Yet his number had vanished, severed from connection, a quiet acknowledgement that he had severed all connections. The elevator doors parted with a soft hiss. She entered the room. The bellhop stood just behind her. The letter smoldered in her purse, a searing mark of disgrace. In the solitude of her hotel room, Julia walked back and forth, grappling with the chaos of her thoughts. Beside the bed, her suitcase lingered, while the city lights danced in a flickering display beyond the towering windows. Yet all she beheld was the visage of her own reflection, a woman in the process of unraveling. She settled onto the bed, reflecting on the instant she decided on Marcus. She had been convinced that Thomas would remain by her side forever. Marcus's confidence radiated, his soft-spoken compliments weaving a tapestry of her unrealized potential, suggesting that she was far too vibrant for a mundane union. She had embraced his attention, convinced that Thomas was lacking in resolve, a man who would patiently await her return, regardless of the circumstances. How brazen she had been, flaunting her affair, chuckling about her newfound freedom from a husband growing old. As Thomas's furious call echoed through the room, she couldn't help but smirk, certain that he would soon find his composure. He consistently did. In that moment, she realized the extent to which her pride had compelled him to take action. A glimmer of remorse emerged, yet fury blazed more fiercely. She had to summon her strength and push against the tide. She possessed neither a home nor wealth, yet she refused to be seen as a mere victim of circumstance. Following a restless night, Julia stirred from her slumber, invigorated by a fresh resolve. She reached out to the bank. This must surely be an error. However, upon revealing her identity, she received a detached, businesslike response. "Dear ma'am, Mr. Thomas Bennett has closed all joint accounts, exercising a valid power of attorney. Further details cannot be disclosed at this time. It would be advisable to reach out to him directly." She ended the call seething, her knuckles pale with tension. She then reached out to her children, now grown and living far away. She dialed her son's number, only to be met with his voicemail. Next, she tried her daughter, who had always shared a closer bond with Thomas, but was greeted by yet another voicemail. Her message was brief and to the point. "I must have a word with you. This matter requires immediate attention. Please return my call." She chose not to allude to the debacle in her voicemail, yet a nagging suspicion lingered within her that Thomas had orchestrated their betrayal. She donned crisp slacks and a fitted blouse, her hair pinned neatly in place before hailing a taxi that would take her directly to the hospital. If she could sever the roots of Thomas's sabotage, perhaps the HR department would see him merely as a disgruntled spouse weaving tales of deceit. Ultimately, she had garnered the admiration of her department head. She had a reputation for being an exceptional, albeit candid, nurse manager. Her skill and experience were essential to their needs. Let them attempt to sully her reputation. She would battle fiercely and relentlessly. She made her entrance just before the noon hour, brushing aside the inquisitive glances of her co-workers in the lobby. It seems the news is circulating. With determination, she strode into HR, anticipating a swift resolution. A woman with a serious expression behind the main desk welcomed her. The nameplate bore the inscription, Karen Douglas, HR Manager. Julia recalled the name from Thomas's correspondence. Her stomach tightened with a sudden intensity. Karen Douglas's gaze shot up with an icy intensity. "Ah, Julia Bennett, your arrival has been anticipated." Her voice was sharp, a thread of disapproval weaving through each syllable. Julia straightened, reclaiming her posture. "I am here to address the absurd assertions that my husband has seemingly put forth. I'm uncertain about the contents of his message, but it appears he has forwarded explicit images. Julia Bennett, along with photographs and statements from a private investigator. He issued a warning of legal action for violating our morality clause should we persist in employing you or Dr. Marcus Marshall." Julia's lips quivered slightly. "That is utterly unacceptable. He is merely a husband consumed by bitterness. The foundation of legality is notably absent. How could you possibly invade my privacy in such a manner? When you were brought on board, you did sign a code of conduct, didn't you?" Karen Douglas raised an eyebrow. She revealed a folder saying, "We have it here." The policy encompasses a provision stating that employees in specific positions, particularly those who embody the hospital's image, may face termination due to public scandals or immoral conduct that threatens to tarnish the institution's reputation. She gently tapped a line that had been marked in bright hues. "We possess a reason?" "This is nonsense," Julia snapped, her heart racing with intensity. It was not a matter of public scandal. but rather a deeply personal issue. Karen Douglas's voice carried an icy calmness. Your husband's email was remarkably detailed. The information was disseminated among numerous colleagues, medical professionals, philanthropic collaborators, and sponsors. The images are quite explicit. Whispers ripple through the hospital corridors and extend far beyond their confines. Complaints have surfaced from staff regarding your behavior, which they perceive as unethical. Additionally, donors have expressed their desire to distance themselves from any associated scandal. Color flooded Julia's cheeks. Not even in her darkest dreams had she envisioned Thomas would take such drastic measures, broadcasting her humiliations throughout the city. Is that all there is? Are you really going to dismiss me so easily? Karen Douglas pressed her lips together. We are currently in the process of consulting with our legal counsel regarding the matter. I am not here to engage in a discussion regarding the ethics of your private choices, Julia Bennett. However, the hospital's board believes it must safeguard itself against the possibility of litigation and the backlash from the public. With a graceful motion, she pushed an envelope across the desk. Your suspension without pay is effective immediately and will remain in place until further notice. Julia gazed in disbelief. She yearned to unleash the sharpest words she could conjure, yet a tempest of clashing feelings ensnared her speech. With a swift motion, she seized the envelope and pivoted sharply on her heel. As she walked away, Karen Douglas called out to her. An escort from security will accompany you to retrieve your personal belongings from your locker. A guard materialized at her side, a formidable figure whose face betrayed no emotion. With determination, she strode forward, her chin held high, acutely aware of the gaze of the staff upon her. The news had certainly traveled far and wide. Some individuals gazed with astonishment, while others murmured quietly in her absence. Julia sensed the humiliation seep further into her being, igniting a fierce anger within her. She discovered Dr. Marcus by the nurse's station, surrounded by a group of staff members. His visage was ashen, beads of sweat gathering on his brow. A handful of nurses who had once held him in high regard now regarded him with open disdain. He caught sight of Julia and frowned, yet a glimmer of fear flickered in his eyes. What on earth is happening? Julia insisted. Marcus stepped away from the group, gently taking her arm to guide her to a more private corner. Your husband, Marcus, with a venomous whisper, sent images and videos to HR. He is utterly undermining my professional journey. I find myself entangled in an investigation. This is utterly astonishing. Julia wrenched her arm away. My unstable spouse? Your little games in Colombia left me feeling utterly humiliated. Did you really think I desired to be splashed across email newsletters? I find myself on the brink of losing my job as well. He fixed her with a piercing gaze. Do not place the blame on my shoulders. You were the one lamenting about your gentle husband, confiding that you felt you had the freedom to act as you pleased. Had I been aware of his serpentine nature, I would have kept my distance entirely. The elevator chimed softly, its sound echoing down the corridor. They were approached by security. Marcus tensed, ripping the stethoscope from around his neck, retreating like a trapped creature. He cursed softly to himself, frustration lacing his words. I find myself called to the realm of HR. It could very well be my demise. Julia's lip curled in disdain. She harbored no compassion. She could still recall the way he had reveled in triumph when Thomas first reached out, deriding Thomas's alleged frailties and asserting that true men do not whimper. Observe him now, reduced to a state of whimpering. She cast him a frigid look. Relish the open relationship, she retorted, mirroring Thomas's jeer. With a decisive turn, she walked away, leaving Marcus simmering in the aftermath of security's presence. Just as Julia was about to step out of the hospital, a voice she recognized called out from behind her. She turned swiftly to find Nicole from next door, the very neighbor with whom Julia had attempted to orchestrate a clandestine lifestyle behind Thomas's back. Nicole stood with her arms crossed, her expression a canvas of disappointment. Ah, if it isn't the renowned globetrotter, Nicole remarked with a chill in her voice, her gaze sweeping over Julia's effortlessly chic ensemble. I trust you have had the chance to peruse Thomas's letter by this point? Julia felt a flutter in her stomach. What brings you to this place? Dean attended a routine checkup. I decided to visit HR to submit the necessary paperwork for a new part-time role I'm about to embark on. And would you believe it? Your visage graces every corner of the building, a constant reminder of your presence. Unavoidable. Julia swallowed, her pride clashing with the sharp sting of humiliation as she was acknowledged amidst her unraveling. I trust you are enjoying yourself immensely. Withhold your assessment. I understand that you and your husband are exploring the world of swinging, so let's not feign any sense of righteousness. Nicole's lips curled into a bitter laugh. Engaging in the act, indeed, yet devoid of betrayal. A distinction exists. Dean and I lay bare our thoughts and feelings without reservation. Truth and transparency reign supreme. You attempted to draw me into your secret affair with Marcus, all while keeping it hidden from Thomas. That is not the way it functions. You brought this upon yourself, Julia snapped, her irritation palpable. Do not even think about lecturing me. You nourished my mind with your ideas for months, showcasing your liberated way of living, and behold the impact it had on my marriage. Nicole gently shook her head, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes. Do not hold me accountable for the decisions you have made. Thomas is a decent fellow. Had you engaged in a candid dialogue with him, one can only speculate on the potential agreements that might have emerged. Rather, you deceived, twisted the truth, and brought him to shame. I was completely unaware. You never even shared your intentions with him. Julia's fists tightened into resolute balls of determination. You stand by him even after he has shattered my whole existence. He orchestrated the sale of my house, absconded with my funds, and turned the tide of public opinion against me. He is the true monster in this narrative. Nicole's eyes narrowed with intensity. He became what you shaped him to be. Every action carries its weight, Julia. During our dinner, I conveyed that to him. He had no desire to share a bed with me, just so you know. He regarded the notion with a sense of revulsion, considering how you attempted to ensnare us in your web of deceit. Heat surged through Julia's cheeks. She yearned to unleash a cutting remark, yet the phrases eluded her grasp. At last, she succeeded in curling her lip in disdain. Convey to him my sincere wishes for a wonderful life in that less-than-ideal RV. You may retain your self-righteous drivel. With a swift turn on her heel, she strode away, dismissing the ascending steps behind her. As Julia departed from the hospital, ominous clouds gathered overhead, and the rain cascaded down, mirroring her somber spirit. She found herself suspended, with the looming possibility of termination ahead. Her credit cards had been canceled. The dwelling she had once cherished as her own was now in the hands of a youthful couple. She envisioned the backyard deck, a place where her dreams of freedom had once taken flight. At that moment, it belonged to them. She retrieved her phone and reached out to two former colleagues for assistance. One, with a hint of reluctance, noted that Thomas had provided some evidence. The other remained silent, offering no response. Their dismissal ignited a fire within her. What does it matter if she had wandered off the path? Marriages have endured far greater challenges. How could they possibly judge her? With no options left, she found herself back at the Ambassador Hotel, compelled to make do with Thomas's demeaning gift card. Within the confines of the taxi, she seethed quietly. She needed to locate Thomas. She reached out to former neighbors and even contacted the real estate agent who had facilitated the sale of their home. Silence reigned, with no response in sight. He had obliterated every remnant of his existence. That night, Julia remained in her hotel room, gazing at the city lights that seemed to taunt her with their untroubled existence. She glanced at her phone. Silence reigns, devoid of calls, texts, or any semblance of support. Yet her inbox brimmed with messages. With a sense of trepidation, she ventured a glance and discovered forwarded emails from Thomas, accompanied by photos of her nestled in bed with Marcus. A knot of revulsion coiled within her gut. The subject lines pierced like a sharp arrow. The new chapter of my wife's life. Physicians devoid of ethics. Exploring the dynamics of open relationships. Only her side. He had dispatched them to friends, family, and even those he knew from church. Fury coursed through her veins. She moved restlessly, envisioning retribution, contemplating legal action, pulling him into the courtroom. Yet could it truly be considered slander if the images held authenticity? He held the advantage. She fell onto the bed, her fingers clutching the sheets tightly, a storm of anger brewing within her. What could have driven him to this decision? He had transformed their intimate turmoil into a sensational scandal. Had he only managed it with a whisper, there was potential for salvage, a glimmer of hope amidst the wreckage. Rather, he was dismantling her existence, fragment by fragment. Yet a faint whisper within her urged that she had ignited the spark. She swiftly dispelled that notion. The dawn unveiled a glimmer of promise. Her daughter returned her call, leaving a voicemail that felt achingly formal. "Dear Mom, I have just received your message." Words escaped me at the moment. My father revealed it all to me. We beheld the images. He exhibited a remarkable level of thoroughness. "Mother, I find myself quite disheartened. My concerns for him weigh heavily on my mind as well. He carries the weight of pain and resentment. He mentioned that he would be departing for a time. I care for you deeply, yet I find myself unable to stand by your actions. I wish to remain uninvolved in the conflict between you and Dad. Perhaps there will come a day when we can converse, but for now, I require some time. I apologize." Julia shut her eyes, a wave of tears on the brink of spilling over. Her very own daughter had cast judgment upon her. Once more her voice echoed in the void, leaving only a message behind. She endeavored to understand her son. Silence prevails. Desperation seeped into her voice as she recorded her messages. "Kindly allow me the opportunity to elaborate. It appears different than it truly is." Yet she understood that Thomas had shaped the story to his advantage. For hours she immersed herself in the search for lawyers, driven by the desire to take legal action against Thomas. Yet every firm turned her away. One was straightforward. If the evidence holds true, then it cannot be deemed defamation. Without financial resources, one cannot contest the sale of assets. She ended the call with a string of curses. She possessed nothing. Without employment, without possessions, without assistance. For the first time, a profound sense of desperation washed over me. On that peculiar afternoon, an unusual email materialized. Her heart leaped with a sudden thrill. "Is that you, Thomas?" She unsealed it, her eyes darting over the contents with haste. "Julia, you may be overlooking my words, yet I shall make my attempt regardless. I've created this temporary email, so please refrain from attempting to track me. I will be shutting it down shortly. Now you understand the sensation of having your existence contorted without your consent. This system was brought into existence by you. I have placed some of your belongings in a storage unit, the details of which are provided below. Merely an assortment of trinkets, age correspondence, devoid of any real worth. Access will be granted on Saturday from 8 a.m. to noon. Once that moment passes, everything fades away. I wouldn't count on my presence. My journey has already begun. Imagine I find myself several states distant. The expanse of the open road unfolds with breathtaking beauty. This appears to be my final act of generosity. I find myself compelled to act, driven by the remnants of affection I once held for you, and the understanding that you may yearn for some tokens from days gone by. Perhaps not. Our Julia felt a tightness in her chest. He was methodically removing her from the fabric of their existence. Yet there existed a perverse form of politeness within it. He offered her the chance to rescue a collection of remnants. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, crafting a seething response, only to be met with the disheartening sight of an error message as the email bounced back. The address was no longer active. Curse him. At 7:45 a.m. that Saturday, Julia found herself in a forsaken alley lined with grimy storage units, the sky above cloaked in a dreary gray. Another night had slipped away in the hotel, her gift card dwindling with each passing moment. She had scarcely touched her food, saving the meager remnants for her shelter. Fatigue clung to her like a heavy shroud. The heavy metal door of the specified unit was secured with a padlock. She cast a fleeting look at her phone. It is now 7:58 in the morning. Would Thomas honor his promise? Just as expected, a local manager strolled past, absent-mindedly toying with a set of keys. "Are you Julia Bennett?" he inquired with an air of indifference. She inclined her head in agreement. With a swift motion, he released the padlock, allowing it to roll away effortlessly. I was advised to open it at 8. If you're not around by noon, I'll secure it once more. As she crossed the threshold, her gaze acclimated to the soft shadows that enveloped the room. Before her stood a row of 4 or 5 boxes, each one adorned with the unmistakable script of Thomas's handwriting. Trinkets, odds and ends, cherished mementos, correspondence, and amusingly, Julia's little luxuries. She delicately pried open the flaps, sifting through their contents with intent. She fell to her knees, searching, feelings in a tumultuous dance. She felt oddly vulnerable, as though Thomas were still pulling the strings of her embarrassment. She stumbled across a faded photograph of them, grinning broadly during a ski adventure from 20 years ago. In that moment captured, he grasped her hand, his eyes shimmering with affection. A sharp wave of nostalgia pierced her, swiftly accompanied by the acrid flavor of all that had come to a close. With a flick of her wrist, she flung the picture away in a fit of anger. Time dragged on, each moment stretching endlessly. Uncertainty clouded her thoughts as she searched for something elusive, perhaps a hint that Thomas's feelings lingered beneath the surface. Yet each object stood as a mere artifact of a union that had once thrived. He had meticulously arranged these boxes to reveal to her precisely what she had discarded. By 9:30, she had meticulously organized the items she genuinely cherished, primarily personal keepsakes that held no monetary value, yet were overflowing with emotional significance. She contemplated abandoning the old love letters, yet an inexplicable urge compelled her to gather them into a bag. She was determined that he wouldn't be the sole keeper of the complete narrative. With a determined effort, she heaved the boxes onto the sidewalk, her eyes scanning the street for a taxi to wave down. She was resolute in her quest to preserve the remnants of her identity. Suddenly, a voice emerged from behind her as an older woman gracefully exited a car, her face marked by a gentle, polite concern. "Greetings, Julia. I am Claire Hudson. My husband and I acquired your house from Thomas." Julia's breath hitched. She recalled the words penned by Thomas. Daniel and Claire Hudson were a young couple. The woman appeared older than Julia had anticipated, perhaps burdened by the pressures of an expanding family. She offered a tentative nod. "Indeed, I am Julia. I apologize for catching you off guard." Thomas shared with us the details of a storage unit, suggesting that we might consider retrieving a few remaining items that were part of the sale. He mentioned that we might be able to collaborate with you. Claire hesitated, a look of discomfort crossing her face. "I simply wish to convey that we seek no conflict. We were taken aback by the sale of your home under such unforeseen circumstances." Julia's expression twisted with fury. "My sanctuary. Indeed, it is complete. Congratulations on reaping the rewards of my husband's small act of retribution." Claire's gaze brimmed with compassion. "I don't mean to intrude, yet it's clear that you're facing quite a bit right now. Rest assured the sale was conducted within the bounds of the law. I understand this may not bring you solace, yet Thomas mentioned that you were seeking a new beginning. It seems that statement may not have been completely accurate." Julia nearly let out a bitter laugh. "It seems he has become quite the master of deception. I trust you will appreciate the elegance of the hardwood floors and the charm of the newly constructed deck I invested in." Claire moved with a certain unease. "If you're interested, we could arrange a visit for you at some point. If you have any memories in that house you'd like to—" "Stop!" Julia snapped, tears burning her eyes. "I have no use for sympathy. Claim the house and adorn it to your heart's desire. I have reached a point of indifference." Claire's expression dimmed. She inclined her head, taking a step back. "I sincerely apologize for this occurrence." "Indeed." She withdrew to her vehicle, abandoning Julia on the sidewalk, her boxes in tow, shoulders trembling with unspoken rage. In the solitude of her hotel room, boxes loomed in the corner, a silent testament to her journey. Julia sank into a chair, her fingers tracing the edges of the worn letters from Thomas as she flipped through them, each one a whisper from the past. A singular note captured her attention. A handwritten draft, left unsigned, composed in the aftermath of a fierce argument that had transpired years prior. A dispute arose regarding trust and loyalty as she harbored suspicions of a fleeting romance, during his time in the Middle East. Within its pages, she had unleashed her frustrations, her skepticism, her bubbling resentment. She had never mustered the courage to present it to him. Now, in a twist of fate, all the cautions she had articulated in that letter had returned to confront her. Thomas, should you ever betray my trust, you will come to deeply regret it. Betrayal is not something I take lightly. I shall shatter the illusions that hold us captive. She released the paper, allowing it to drift from her grasp. The sting of arrogance in that draft lingered with her still. She had never imagined herself as the one to betray, nor did she ever think that the gentle, accommodating Thomas would be the harbinger of utter ruin. The day had finally come. She was unable to extend her time at the ambassador. The front desk conveyed to her that her gift card was almost depleted. She found herself without the funds for a prolonged visit. She came to the unsettling conclusion that she would need to seek refuge in a more affordable motel or perhaps find a friend to lean on. Yet the stark truth was that she had no true friends remaining. Pride clashed with desperation, yet it was desperation that emerged victorious. She found herself at a shabby motel on the fringes of the city, the kind of establishment that offered rooms by the week. Musty air clung to the walls where the wallpaper curled and flaked away, while the fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered, casting an eerie glow. She gazed into the fractured surface of the mirror, struggling to identify the person staring back at her. Shadows of darkness framed her gaze. Her hair, once a flawless cascade, now lacked the luster of a recent salon visit, and the business slacks she wore had seen better days, remnants of a past routine. She descended onto a weary mattress, its springs groaning under her weight. A cockroach darted across the nightstand, prompting her to close her eyes in revulsion. How had it arrived at this point? The sound of her phone ringing pierced the silence. With a swift motion, she seized it, her heart racing. Could it have been Thomas? Alas, it was merely a number concealed from view. After a moment of hesitation, she finally responded. "Greetings," a self-satisfied voice emerged. "Dr. Marcus, you've triumphed, Julia. They dismissed me, effectively casting me out and tarnishing my reputation across half the hospitals in the region. My wife departed as well, so I appreciate that." Her laughter was tinged with bitterness. Did I emerge victorious? Behold my current predicament, ensconced within the confines of a roach motel. Thomas seized it all and set my world ablaze. "Well, that's the consequence of entangling with someone like me, I suppose," Marcus remarked, his words laced with disdain. "You are hardly a paragon of virtue yourself. In the future, choose a dalliance that won't provoke your partner into unleashing chaos upon the professional lives of all involved." She yearned to unleash her fury upon him, yet all that emerged was a profound void. Following a brief pause, Marcus ended the call. She flung the phone away with a dismissive gesture. The final flicker of thrill she had once experienced with Marcus had now been overshadowed by a profound disdain. In a fleeting moment of spite, Julia resolved to embark on one final act of recklessness. She retained the phone number of a former comrade of Thomas's from his military days, a man by the name of Ben Carter. She remembered how Thomas would often share stories of his travels with Ben Carter. Perhaps Ben Carter held the key to Thomas's location, should anyone possess that knowledge. With quivering hands, she pressed the numbers. Ben Carter answered the call. "Greetings?" Her voice carried a tension. "Ben Carter, this is Julia Bennett speaking. He let out a heavy sigh. "Indeed, Julia. Thomas advised me against speaking with you." Her nerves ignited. "Do not even think about ending this call. I apologize. I can't help you," Ben Carter said with unwavering resolve. "Thomas has endured more than his fair share. If you wish to rectify your situation, take it upon yourself to do so." He requested some distance. "I am presenting it to him." With a decisive click, he turned it off. Rage surged within her. With a swift motion, she tossed the phone onto the bed. She found herself alone in her search for Thomas, with no one willing to assist her. The whole world conspired to protect him, granting him the freedom to wander, while she was abandoned to decay. Time dragged on. A week slipped by, then another. Her suspension from the hospital evolved into an official termination. A letter found its way to the motel. Your employment is officially terminated for cause due to a violation of the Code of Conduct, effective immediately. The whispers of her scandal wove their way through the local healthcare network. She discovered no doors ajar. In the interim, the funds from Thomas's embarrassing gift card had vanished. She had no choice but to part with her remaining jewelry, surrendering it for a mere fraction of its true value. She had always taken great pride in her ability to maintain control, yet now she found herself slipping from that last facade. In the stillness of the night, she found herself in the dimly lit motel room, poring over Thomas's typed letter that had set everything in motion. I have no intention of ending our marriage. Divorces hold no significance for me, and the prospect of remarriage is not on my horizon. All that I require is now in my possession. If you wish to exit, you must handle the paperwork. I shall traverse the open road, relishing in the sweet embrace of my freedom. Only this once, if it's not too much trouble. Each time the sheer cruelty of it pierced her heart. He had turned her own words against her. Just once, if you please, alluding to how she had casually mentioned her fling as though it were nothing of consequence. She felt a chill as she understood that his vengeance was not merely tangible, but deeply psychological, a gradual, suffocating annihilation. She remembered the moment she had confided in him, long ago, about her yearning for freedom and adventure. He had replied with a gift of solitude and sorrow. With no other options available, Julia finally summoned the steely resolve to reach out to an attorney regarding her decision to divorce Thomas for abandonment. Perhaps it was the sole route remaining to restore a fragment of honor. She sought a measure of legal clarity. Perhaps she could charge him with the improper use of the power of attorney. The lawyer informed her that the battle ahead would be a challenging one. Thomas had meticulously executed documents, ensured disclaimers were in place for every detail, and had recorded each real estate transfer with flawless signatures. The funds had vanished, presumably into accounts that could not be traced. Thomas's letter revealed that he had utilized her own signature from the original power of attorney, a document she had willingly signed. The lawyer articulated it clearly. Litigation is an option, yet it requires a substantial reserve of resources. The result remains uncertain. Julia gazed vacantly at the legal estimates before her. With her finances in disarray, everything circled back to Thomas's last taunting invitation. She faced the choice of filing for divorce or continuing in a marriage that existed only in name, a woman stripped of a husband, devoid of assets, and bereft of hope. As she stepped out of the office, a profound sense of numbness enveloped her. Her dreams of battling Thomas in the courtroom had crumbled beneath the heavy burden of practicality. She navigated the worn second-hand vehicle she had acquired with funds from the pawn shop back to the motel. The sky loomed, thick with the promise of rain. Heavy clouds loomed overhead, casting a shadow of perpetual despair. She positioned herself behind the wheel, the engine softly ticking in the stillness. For a fleeting moment, tears cascaded down her cheeks, relentless and uncontainable. Once, she had walked with an air of unyielding confidence, but now she found herself weeping in a motel parking lot, the odor of stale cigarettes wafting through a broken window. Finally, summoning the strength to act, she unlocked the door to her motel room and stumbled inside, flinging her bag onto the wobbly table. She regarded the boxes from the storage unit, meticulously arranged in the corner. Crinkled love letters cascaded from above, taunting her. She struck the table with her fist, a fire of rage igniting within her. "Thomas Bennett," she spat, her teeth grinding together. "You despicable scoundrel." Even as her voice quivered, she could hear in her mind the haunting echo of that phone call he had made weeks prior, his tone laced with raw emotion, betrayal, and pain. In a way that seemed almost perverse, she had shaped him into this version of himself. She had shattered his pride, paraded her betrayal, and abandoned him in a state of utter worthlessness. In response, the gentleman transformed into a figure of monstrosity, eclipsing her arrogance with a vengeance that was even more merciless. With a final, somber act, she unlocked her phone and navigated to the photo gallery. A glimpse from her first entanglement, the Red Roof Inn meeting, captivated her attention. She gazed at the younger reflection of herself, a smirk playing on her lips, poised beside a fleeting companion whose name had faded into obscurity. With a decisive tap, she pressed delete, believing that perhaps by erasing that memory, she could ease the weight she carried. Yet it did not. Her phone remained a repository of countless images from her life, snapshots that Thomas had already appropriated and turned against her in a public arena. Victory was his. That knowledge coursed through her like shards of glass, sharp and piercing in her veins. She found herself with only the scant belongings from the storage unit, a sullied reputation, and no safety net to catch her fall. The relentless tide of Thomas's vengeance had engulfed her. As darkness enveloped the world once again, the city transformed into a blur of vibrant neon lights and the faint glow of distant headlights. Julia curled up on the bed, clutching her knees, allowing herself to savor the unfiltered bitterness of her demise. Had she embraced kindness? Had she not paraded her arrogance? Had she approached the idea of an open marriage with sincerity? Perhaps the outcome would have been altered. Had she not dismissed Thomas's furious calls, perhaps he would not have resorted to such drastic measures. She detested him, yet a fragment of her being acknowledged that the roots of his animosity had been sown by her own actions. Thus concluded Julia Bennett's dreams of being untouchable. She found herself surrounded by the remnants of her own victorious laughter in Marcus's hotel bed, now overshadowed by the persistent drip of a leaky faucet in a modest motel. Within that cramped room, heavy with the scent of stale cigarettes, she confronted the harsh reality at last. Her arrogance had awakened Thomas's wrath, and to her astonishment, he had demonstrated that he could embody a darkness far beyond her wildest imaginings. As the final bitter laugh lingered in her throat, Julia gazed into the abyss, tormented by her own thoughts, coming to the painful realization that a single act of reckless betrayal can unleash a tempest of repercussions from which there is no refuge.